When in fear fáilte curó velic an siochanú, cic an siomer quinn. Is mór an or domsa, mar céit aránach an cahar arsa seo, fe ma óstach an imacht náisiúnta seo. It is a great pleasure to host this important national event on behalf of the city and people of Dublin, which is held annually here in the Mansion House. We feel privileged to be here among survivors and descendants of survivors of the Holocaust, who made Dublin and Ireland their home. Holocaust Memorial Day marks the date of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau on the 27th of January 1945. Tonight we recall the suffering inflicted on the Jewish people and those of other faiths persecuted during the Holocaust. We will reflect on this and on the suffering still inflicted throughout the world today. We acknowledge the work of Holocaust Education Trust Ireland in its endeavours to educate about the Holocaust and ensure that it is always remembered. Síochan liv Galéir.
It is vital work that keeps the necessary horror and memory of the Holocaust alive, and so too does the Crocus Project. This school's initiative was set up in 2005 by the Holocaust Education Trust Ireland for pupils aged 11 years. The children plant yellow crocuses in autumn. This is done in memory of the 1.5 million Jewish children and the hundreds of thousands of other children who died in the Holocaust. This year, 70,000 children across Europe are involved, every one of them a witness to the yellow Star of David that Jews were forced to wear during the Nazi rule. The Crocus Project helps to stimulate and initiate discussion among young people who will one day themselves take positions of standing within our respective communities. These crocuses, as you know, come up through the snows of winter. From darkness and death comes new hope and new life.
32 countries were represented at the conference, including Ireland, where delegates were asked if they would accept Jewish refugees. Most countries said they had no room for Jews, or that their quotas were already full. One country even stated that no Jew is too many. With nowhere to turn, the Jews found themselves trapped within their own borders. Today, as the world debates the difficulties arising from vast numbers of refugees requesting asylum in Europe, we are reminded of similar discussions that took place during the years of the Holocaust. Images of boats crossing the Mediterranean, crammed with desperate refugees, remind us of similar voyages undertaken by Jewish refugees during the Second World War. The St. Louis set sail from Hamburg in 1939, bound for the United States, with 937 Jews on board. US visas never materialized, and permission to land in the US was rescinded. The ship was forced to return to Europe, where the majority of the passengers eventually perished. The Struma, which set sail for Turkey in 1942, with 769 passengers on board, was stranded in Istanbul harbour. It was denied assistance and was eventually sunk in the Black Sea, where most of the refugees drowned. Not a lot has changed in the past 75 years.
It is estimated that more than 1 million Jews died in the ghettos which were created in every country occupied by the Germans. They were established in poor and run-down areas of cities and large towns, with little sanitation, chronic overcrowding, and starvation rations. Ghettos were usually located close to railways and often near killing sites or death camps. Many ghettos were walled in or fenced off, and Jews who left them without permission were severely punished. The cruelty starvation, overcrowding and disease all contributed to the death toll. Although there are heroic stories of resistance, most of the ghetto populations were murdered and there were few survivors.
I was in Germany at the end of the war with the Royal Air Force when we were asked by other British forces to assist in opening some of the concentration camps in the region. As we approached Bergen-Belsen, we were assaulted by an indescribable stench which reached us a few miles away from the gates. Once inside the camp, we saw piles of corpses, the emaciated survivors, and ghost-like victims dying in front of our eyes. On confronting the horrors of the camps, we were glad to be of help even at this late stage. And all of us felt our military service had been worthwhile. On meeting survivors like Susie and Tommy, I would do it all again.
In all cases of genocide, people have been targeted because of their ethnicity, religious and cultural affiliations. In Armenia, over 1 million people were murdered between 1915 and 1923. In Cambodia in the 1970s, it is estimated that 2 million people were murdered by the Khmer Rouge, and in Rwanda in the 90s, over 1 million people were murdered, often by neighbors and people they knew, who joined the killing squads in hand-to-hand killing. In Bosnia, approximately 8,000 Muslim men and boys were massacred in Srebrenica in 1995, in the single largest mass murder in Europe since 1945. The Holocaust is the name given to one specific case of genocide that was unprecedented in its totality: the attempt to destroy the Jewish people of Europe and all traces of Jewish culture, history, and memory. By the end of the Holocaust, 6 million Jewish men, women, and children had been murdered in ghettos, mass shootings, concentration camps, and in death camps. The genocide of the Roma took place during the Holocaust, as did the murder of thousands of others who were victims of Nazi atrocities. Genocide is not a single event in time, but a gradual process that begins when discrimination, racism, and hatred are not checked, when people are denied their human rights and their civil rights. For this reason, it is important that we respect each other's differences, and when we see injustice, we speak out.
I was born Zsuzsi Molnar in 1942. We were a small family comprising my mother Gisela, my father Sandor, my brother Terry, and myself. In 1944, Adolf Eichmann oversaw the roundup and deportation of more than 430,000 Hungarian Jews to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where most of them perished, in the gas chambers. During these months, the Gestapo came for my mother, brother, and me. Our parents had perished. Terry and I were very young children when we came to Ireland and had been told that we were the only two members of our family to have survived the Holocaust. But last year, my story changed. In spring 2015, Holocaust Educational Trust Ireland was contacted by someone in Hungary called Sandor Molnar, who thought he might be related to me. Over the course of emails and exchange of photographs and documents, it transpires that he is indeed a relation. He is my first cousin. He is named after my father. He has filled in a few details about my family, which I had not previously known. I have learned that my father was one of 4 brothers who lived in a small town of Korczak, about 100 miles from Budapest, where they ran a timber business. My new cousin, who was born after the war, is the son of the youngest brother, Andor, who survived the Holocaust, along with another brother, Laszlo. My father and the 4th brother, Bela, perished in a Russian labor camp in 1943. Last June, I visited Korczak and saw my grandfather's house, the Jewish cemetery where my grandparents are buried, and the synagogue where all my family prayed. 778 Jews lived in Korczak before the war. 461 of them were murdered in the Holocaust. There is a memorial scroll on the synagogue wall recording the Jews from Korczak who perished in the Holocaust. My family is listed on it, but now the scroll has to be corrected because my brother and I survived. I am gradually being introduced to new first cousins and their children living in Hungary and the United States. This is all very new information for me to absorb, as a very emotional chapter in my personal story is beginning to unfold.
Our generation, and the generation or two after us, will be the last that will be able to say that we stood and shook the hands of some of those who survived. Go home from this place and tell your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren that today in Listowel you looked into eyes that witnessed the most cataclysmic event ever unleashed by mankind upon mankind. Tell them that you met people who will still be remembered and still talked about and still wept over 10,000 years from now. Because if they are not, there will be no hope for us at all. The Holocaust happened, and it can happen again, and every one of us, if only out of our own sense of self-preservation, has a solemn duty to ensure that nothing like it ever occurs again.
Those who did not fit the Nazi image of the supreme Aryan race, such as Poles, Slavs, and ethnic minorities, were murdered, displaced, forcibly sterilized, and incarcerated in concentration camps. In addition to the 3 million Polish Jews, it's estimated that 3 million non-Jewish Polish victims were also murdered in the Holocaust. Polish children were kidnapped and placed with German families to be Aryanized and reared as Germans. Commission number 3 was a program of forced sterilization of hundreds of people of African ancestry because the Nuremberg racial laws had stated that black people belonged to an inferior race. Thousands of other ethnic minorities were also victims of the Nazis. We will always remember.
It is difficult to know the exact number of Roma people who were murdered by the Nazis. What estimates put the figure between 250,000 million. Hundreds of thousands of Roma and city people were rounded up, forced into ghettos, and deported to the concentration and death camps. They wore an identifying black triangle on their camp uniforms, where they were subject to brutality, starvation, disease, medical experiments, or gas to death. We will always remember.
Six candles are dedicated to the memory of the 6 million Jews, including 1.5 million children, who were annihilated in the Holocaust. Jews were murdered in concentration camps, labor camps, and death camps. Jews perished in the ghettos. Jews died of starvation and disease. Jews were shot in the forests. Jews were murdered in the streets and in their homes. Those lighting candles in memory of the Jewish victims of the Holocaust are children or grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, second and third generation. All of them lost countless members of their families in the Holocaust.